By Mikimi wala chansong, and about house blood, wife blood chief him die, then mommy or the crani blow him, or the cry for him because him die, so him wife blood chief. Hai te te rau, o mai mani au, ai te toa wai ta, hai te te rau. Hai te te rau, o mai mani au, ai te toa wai ta, hai te te rau. Diuamu, tani eta rua, ai te toa waita, ai te nang. Diuamu, ni eta rua, ai te toa waita, ai te nang. Ai te te nang, o mai mani au, ai te toa wai ta, ai te nang. Ai te nang, o mai mani au, ai te toa wai ta, ai te nang.
First presenter, Blumi, Dr. Gordon Nanau. Dr. Gordon Nanau has a strong research interest in the areas of political leadership and public sector reforms in the Pacific Island countries, and a keen observer of the impacts of globalization in the local Pacific communities. His research interests include the political economy of development projects, elections and democracy, livelihoods, and Pacific epistemologies. Dr. Nanau is a senior lecturer in the discipline of Government, Development, and International Affairs in the School of Law and Social Sciences at the University of the South Pacific, Laudala Campus. So I'm based Kamlo Suva, and you may happy to us for having him here this morning. Second presenter, Blumi, give him a big hand, please. Thank you, Dr. Nanau. Second presenter, Blumi, have Mr. Stori Hiriasia. He's from Solomon Islands and is currently a PhD candidate, School of Law and Social Sciences. He holds a Master's of Arts in Politics and International Affairs from the University of the South Pacific. Interests include elections, vote buying, and cultural factors that influence voting behavior during elections. Can we give him a big hand for Mr. Stori? And last but not the least, Dr. Derek Mane, him PhD graduate from the University of the South Pacific too, law politics, and me welcome him you this morning here as well. Give him a big hand for Dr. Derek, please. So without further ado, what may happen is by me go through bakata dim presentation blokata, and then at the end, if you may got any question you like ask mokata, then you can direct the question to them. Thank you, Dr. Nanau.
So the purpose of our coming, myself and Tony, to Honiara this week is basically to report or to share some of our key findings in a research project that we've carried out in the Solomons, but more specifically on Malaita and Guadalcanal. So the title of the presentation today is on citizen-state engagement in rural Solomon Islands. Just a bit of background on the research project itself. It's funded by DFAD, but the funding was through the Developmental Leadership program, which is housed at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. So we collaborated, or we talked with colleagues from the University of Birmingham and also La Trobe in Australia to do the research project focusing on the Solomons. So I'm not sure, maybe there are a few research assistants as well in the room who helped us to collect the data and collect the information from both Malaita and Guadalcanal. We were planning to do Isabel in the Western Province as well. Unfortunately, there were some logistical challenges during the Christmas break, so we were unable to cover those, one of those provinces. Anyhow, we decided that we might as well come home and share some of the key findings from the research project, just to initiate discussions at the local level and between those who are interested in this kind of topic. So we're so pleased that you're able to make it today. So the research project, as you can see from the slides there, is that we were interested to identify and learn from cases where leadership has enabled cases of successful development outcomes in the Solomons. A lot has been said, a lot has been written on corruption, bad governance, all the negative aspects that, the labels that are given about Solomon. So we decided when we designed the project, let's look at the positive side of things. Let's look at the positive outliers and understand why have these projects worked, and therefore maybe ultimately we could expand the lessons learned from these positive outliers into the wider Solomon Islands. So that was the focus. We were not looking at these negative aspects of development. We were looking at positive cases of development. So we also wanted to understand cases where a range of leaders, church leaders, traditional leaders or custom leaders, and the state have collaborated effectively to enable positive progress in service delivery. That's why we were looking at these positive projects. And hopefully by learning about what has worked, where and why, we aim to, as I've said earlier, to inform local debates about how to improve development outcomes and maybe reduce community inequalities. So we started off with, a bit on our methodology. Our colleagues from the University of Birmingham who have skills in quantitative methods did some statistical analysis on all the constituencies in the Solomons, and they came up with the constituencies that were doing very well, those that are moderately doing well, and constituencies. And therefore, I think it's better to go in and look at positive cases and learn from them. Because some of the problems that they talk about in my constituency, for instance, are also discussed in Renol Bellona or Ngela or those places. So we decided, given our knowledge of the local context, we asked our colleagues that maybe we can go in, while we are guided by this quantitative analysis, we also go in and look for positive changes in the provinces that we were interested in. So Guadalcanal and Malaita were the ones that we will be reporting on today. And we also, especially Tony and our research assistants, did interviews in Honiara with stakeholders, interviews at the provincial and constituency level, and more importantly, we talked with talk stories or informal discussions at the local level, especially where the communities that host the projects that we were interested in. So that's a bit on our methodology. And looking at the constituencies, we actually went and looked at projects in the Lau Bailelea constituency and also East Malaita, the two constituencies that we looked at in Malaita. And these are the four development projects that we looked at. The Rameai Community King's Table House, Bailelea and Faumamanu feeder roads, Atori Cattle Rehabilitation Project. Tony and maybe if any of our research assistants in the crowd is present today will talk to us in more detail about this, the specifics of these projects on Malaita. And on Guadalcanal, we looked at projects in northeast Guadalcanal and northwest Guadalcanal. Part of the reason is it's also logistically easier to deal with these two constituencies. So on Guadalcanal, we look at the Numbu and Horabao water supply projects, the Tuvaruhu concrete footpath project, and the Pauka church building project. Again, Tony will shed more light into these projects on Guadalcanal. So as we moved through these phases, we collected and verified stories of successful community action to produce public goods from different perspectives. And as part of our strategy in the field, we also recruited and trained from the constituencies that host these development projects. We recruited and trained from those constituencies, at least one male and one female from East Malaita, for instance, one male and one female from Bailelea, and the same applies on Guadalcanal. And part of the reason why we did that is so that it's easier for the host communities to accept us to go in, okay? Because they'll see the research assistants, and our local villages, they'll basically say, oh, this is the son or the daughter of this person. So they are part of the community. So you don't have to, go through a lot of complicated processes to be part of the discussion. So we tried as much as possible to do that, to be accepted and be part of the community engagements. So gender was catered for there, and as well as people who speak the language, so that if they are angry with us, or when they angry with us, we know what they're talking about, or those kinds of stuff, which are really important if you're carrying out field research in our villages. So very briefly, our analytical framework, because we are working under the Developmental Leadership program. We have to use their analytical framework. And the DLP's analytical framework focuses or looks at these three levels of analysis: the individual level, the collective level, and the societal level. So when we go into the villages, or when we went into the villages rather, we were looking at the individual, what's happening at the individual level, the collective level, and the societal level. So at the individual level, we tried to understand what motivates leaders to drive developmental outcomes and how they gained the power and legitimacy to act. Okay, so how na disval money me accepting family leading disval project lo village? What gave him or her the legitimacy to do that? Okay, so that's at the individual level. At the collective level, we tried to understand how those leaders overcame collective action problems, recognized their shared interests, and formed collectives or networks with the power and legitimacy to act. How do these individuals, deal with land issues, or how do they deal with interfamily problems that may arise because of the projects that they were initiating? Okay, so that's at the collective level. At the societal level, excuse me, we try to understand the relationships between leaders and followers and the wider set of social norms, ideas, institutions, and relationships that block or drove change. So that's at the societal level. What are the important relationships that ensured these projects were implemented to success, so they had positive outcomes? What are the societal norms? What are the tribal arrangements, the relationship arrangements that are in that community that may explain some of the stuff that we are interested in? So our analytical framework is directly from DLP, the Developmental Leadership Project, but looking at those three specific levels. So just to go through some of the key findings, as I've stated there, the cost of collective action or collaboration can be high for communities. So, when you get into a community, or when you go into a community, you realize that there are different pressures, different demands from all sectors of society. Okay? You may be struggling to feed your family, or they may be struggling to feed the family. They may be busy with their poultry project, or maybe a fishing project. But how did they manage to overcome those challenges and work together, cooperate to deliver those outcomes? Okay. So most of the projects that we studied overcame these challenges, and things, the words or the concepts that came out clearly in many of the projects were collaboration, communication, and leadership. And we observed from the projects that there are distinct roles of tribal leaders, community and church leaders, MPs, provincial leaders, in contributing to mobilizing social action, dispute resolution, planning, and those kinds of things. So, there's roles, or there are distinct roles for, say, tribal leaders or heads of different clans that own land in those vicinity or within the vicinity of the project. There's also a distinct role for church leaders, for instance. When there's a conflict, they do play a critical part in getting those people together, reconciling them, and so on and so forth. So the point is that I think in these development projects, there are distinct roles for each of these important leaders that we've listed there. There's also something to do with the fact that, when especially people in the books, when they talk about leadership, they focus on individuals. They focus on this leader was instrumental in pushing that project to fruition, for instance. We found in the research that I think it's also important that you look at in many of our villages, certain leaders play different roles. For instance, one of these leaders may be a pastor or a church leader, chairman of a church committee, for instance. At the same time, he or she may be the secretary of the school committee. At the same time, maybe he or she is a member of the land-owning entity, land-owning tribe. So it's important that you recognize that in the projects that or development projects that you're interested in. And we found that is a fact in many of our the projects that we looked at. The reason why we highlight that is that there's too much emphasis on the instrumental factors that enable public goods provision. Most of the time, we seem to think that it's the funding that's important. We need to get the fund before we get this project done or before we get this development outcome, or before we achieve it. But in our research, we found that although funding and resources are important, there are other important things that need to happen, and the funding is only an enabling tool that would ensure the project positively achieved. So I think that's one of the major points that I think Tony will be talking about as well. So in all these cases, in both Guadalcanal and Malaita, the relational aspects of projects are fundamental to progress. Okay, those relationships at the local level. Who is related to who? Who is the landowner? Who is the person who may be responsible for ensuring that there is reconciliation if there are intra-tribal problems or inter-tribal problems, especially dealing with land and so on and so forth. So relational aspects of projects are critical in the context of Solomon Islands. So what makes leadership successful in the 8 stories of change that we covered? One of the common things that our respondents or the communities told us is that people cooperating, leadership that is transparent, leaders who are known to be honest, and leaders who clearly explain things to people. So communication is really critical. If people don't really know what this project is about, how much is involved, who is funding it, what is the expected outcome, you're confusing those people, and therefore the likelihood of that project to fail is high. So communication is important, but it's also obvious that our people, they're interested in honest leaders. They're interested in people who are transparent. And that is part of the legitimacy that gives them, the legitimacy to lead. The other point is that there has to be a convincing theory of change that clearly showed benefits or promises that you have to give to people. What is in it for them? Okay, so take for instance, somebody coming up with a water supply project, okay? And there are water supply projects that we also covered. You have to convince those people, why is it that we need standpipes when there's a huge river running beside the village? It's free. Why should we be looking for standpipes? Okay? Why should I be contributing to diesel or petrol to pump water through those pipes when I can have the free flowing river that's just running across, beside my village? So there has to be a convincing theory of change. Unless you convince people that this is important, this is beneficial, it may be just another, waste of funds, a waste of time. Many development initiatives have been hampered by land disputes and the absence of negotiation with tribal leaders, as we all know. In cases of North Malaita, challenge the common idea that current land tenure system does not allow development on customary land. If you look at the roads that Tony will be talking about, they have mechanisms in place that, whenever, if there's a dispute, they dealt with it by themselves, not by anybody who is from outside dealing with that. They have their mechanisms, they have their own policing mechanisms in place. So, the general idea that customary land is a stumbling block may be or should be questioned in this situation, at least from our findings. So out of the 4 projects that we've covered, we looked at in Malaita, the one that's on alienated land, the cattle rehabilitation project, indicates that people's motivation was cash because that land does not belong to them. It was alienated during the colonial era. So, the sense of ownership is not there. So the interest was basically, to have your contracts and, clear this plot, get the money and, do something with the money that you get as a group. So, it questions those kinds of generalizations that customary land tenure is a stumbling block to development. The other point is that while church as an organization is not financially responsible for community projects, the pressure it puts on adherents to make changes, it does have a lot of impact on the success of projects. Churches may not be directly involved, but if a priest or a pastor stands at the pulpit and tells people that Wednesday is community work for the water supply project, there's very high likelihood that these people will attend because of the position that church leaders have. And I think it's one of those institutions that we haven't really explored and haven't really used in the development process. Tony will talk about those things as well. So church and custom are useful institutions in local community for stability, reconciliation, and for generally pushing the projects forward. As I've said, no project will ever progress unless the customary landowners or those who own those places agree to those. You may be communicating with village leaders and you agree on a project to continue to go on or to be implemented, but without communicating with or convincing the groups that own the land on which that project will be implemented, it's bound to fail because they'll say no, and they are the real people who will say yes or no to those kinds of projects on their land. So there is a need to rethink the involvement of informal institutions uh, unfortunately, we don't consider them informal institutions, because I think all of us in this room are members of tribes, clans, and so on and so forth. They are not informal. We grow up knowing that we are members of these institutions. Okay, so, but at least for the purposes of this presentation, there is a need to rethink the involvement of informal institutions in development. They must be seen as institutions that positively contribute towards development rather than being obstacles to development. So we need to harness them and use them in development initiatives to ensure that some of these aspirations that we have as a country are achieved. So those are basically some of the key findings that I'd like to run through, and now I'll ask Tony to come and talk about the specific details of some of those projects. Obviously, he won't go through all of them, but he'll talk about, he'll highlight some of the important stuff.
So I was on the ground in 2021 and 2022 with the help of research assistants. And we went out to the communities that we studied, and especially the projects. And by now you should have realized that an important part of what we were doing then was that through these research projects, we were able to articulate some of the things that are important to us, that make things work, and especially in our case, when we talk about development and we talk about wanting to do this and wanting to do that. So many times, what is important to us, they are often overlooked, especially in design and planning. And so we try to, tell in the formal space, for instance, through literature and whatever else we target. We try to tell our part of the story, what is important to us as Solomon Islanders, what is important to make things work. And these stories are important because for those who want to engage with us in development discussion and debate, they have to know our part of the story and what is important to us in order to make things work. Otherwise, it will be the same story over and over again. Money is dumped in, and then after a period, the donor goes. Nothing is left for us to see or to benefit from. So that's basically some of the things that are important, especially for this our research project. And we also heard Dr. Nanau highlighted the role of informal institutions, especially in these projects. And these projects worked, or we would call them successful, mainly because of the involvement of these institutions. Rather than imposing something from outside onto the communities, these projects were mainly initiated from within. So the people, tried to respond to some of the problems that they deal with over the past decades, 20 or 30 years or so. When we went up to and I was telling others yesterday, especially at the MRD and the MD Park, I was telling them, we went along the Bailelia road that went right up into the bush. I don't know exactly the number of kilometers up, but you would realize how much that access means to those people within that area, because they used to be cut off from other basic services because a lot of them are housed down at the coastal areas. And so in order to bring someone from the bush to have access to medical services, maybe at Malu or Auki, They have to carry them. And some of these also involved getting pregnant women down the road and then to trucks and vehicles and then up to these basic services. So we looked at the road, and we were more interested in the collaborations between the tribal groups, especially those whose land the road cuts through. And the road goes through 3 different tribal groups. And it's very interesting to hear their story, how they negotiated the passage through that particular area and region. And although there are problems there, although they struggled with some of these things that, it's common to us as Solomon Islanders, especially when you talk about the rural areas and land issues. They also struggled with this, but they managed to negotiate their way through and navigate through these challenges to have the road cut right up to the bush and have access. I was there during a market, I and Eric behind there. We were there during a market day, and it's very interesting to see because the people were selling, and there was also a vehicle, a pickup truck with goods. So, okatamania sell bye sell finish. Okata go bye too. Okata soap and okata sugar and everything yellow truck. That kind of service was absent a few years back or a decade back. But that's what I was trying to say. You have to be there to realize how important the access is to the people. The repair and those stuff is still, some challenges to deal with, but at least they have access that goes right up and provides new opportunities, especially when you talk about market producers. I realized that place they were also farming the dry body, the rice that grows on not the swampy area, but just on the hillside. They were also farming it. They were farming kava. And so the access provided access to market for those people. But more interestingly, in our case, we were looking at how these tribal groups and these other institutions like the church were involved in trying to advance development, especially to address some of their needs within that area. And these informal institutions, they played a very big role, especially trying to mobilize the groups involved through the church as well as through the tribal groups. So in that particular place, I think in order to make things work, they have to, take responsibility. They have to take responsibility within the tribe to try and solve their issues, to try and deal with whatever disagreements there. They have to work between them in order to make things move and allow access. I was told by one of the tribal chiefs that from the beginning they had to work with, I think their forefathers, they made a kind of a custom a promise not to allow, with the fear of outside influence, I think, way back, decades ago, they made a promise not to allow access up into the place. So in order to start the road, they had to, go back, start them custom, arrange some reconciliation law church. And interestingly, that same tribal chief, he also is the pastor at the time where Milo there. And he was also using his church position to mobilize things and move things forward. That's what Gordon was talking about earlier, where the different leaders, so many times people view leadership, from outside, just looking at the individual. But in our case, these individuals, they could be wearing different hats and doing different things in order to advance things. I hope you understand me. Yeah, so they are very important and they are key to mobilizing people and support for whatever is there to do. And then we have other cases like the one on the alienated land. him project him go through the provincial government, yeah, and him go down for revive him cattle. Used to be a cattle area. Interest lo people him lo plotian oma ang contract ot putum lo him. So as long as ot brass finish him, this one mo kata ask him. So you've seen a different approach and a different attitude lo people, especially when whatever is there is not really connected to them. They do not really take ownership of it. And I think all they tried is what they can get out of it and what we are taken side lo selling. So that's another thing that I think the findings highlight. And I want to stress and put an emphasis on it, especially when we talk about development. But me no go a long time too much now. When we talk about development, and as I stated earlier, sometimes in the planning and the design, we were often overlooked. What is important to us may not be important to outside donors. So they put a lot of emphasis on the instrumental factors, like Gordon was saying, the funding. But in our case, we found that there are things on the ground that are more important to the people, that are important to be included within the design and planning, because they would lay the foundation for things to work. So the relational aspect, for instance, the networking between Okata groups here, very important. You cannot bypass it. And what is important to them culturally, inside the community Okata. You see, so many times we have to have that right in order for things to work. But sometimes people were Okata give him selen, Okata no look him as important. One interesting thing, once you ask them Okata people for line him up, priorities, what na o thing important, by you find them prayer na him topum list ya. Me fala prayer about, me fala prayer between me fala. So some of these things that don't I not care about here. But it's important to us. They form the foundation for things to work. So the important thing about the research is telling our story, telling what is important to us. If we are going to address our needs, these are things that you need to consider. And these are some of the important things that the research highlighted, and especially in the publications that we are putting out. So just for your information, I think we have one publication out already. Why Mifala come around more especially? Because we want to target policymakers law. Although you may say that in our case it's hard, but we are trying to do whatever we can do to put information out there so that whatever important you must have provide him others with him as inform him the debate about development and what now him good for me as Solomon Islanders. So I think by me not taking me too long, by me stop lo here, by me no go in detail of projects here. Otro guale me cosa forget them a little bit. Me will do some projects lo here. They were partly funded. The ones at the one at Numbu, for instance, the contractor left halfway through. And take him selenia him go now. So the community had to mobilize. They completed the project. They currently are using it. And they organized themselves to pay monthly contributions. So, okata buy petrol, okata generate the pamum water, or supply community. And as Gordon was trying to say, Big River too run no side, but you have to sell them something where hem important so that okata looking hem important to have that water supply. Yeah, man. For instance, sell them okata the safety low drinking water, yeah? And bringing the water rather than walking to the river. It's right behind your house, so it saves time. You can spend time to do other things. So these are things where you sell them so that people take ownership and people are willing to be part of these things. That's what he was trying to explain through the use of convincing theory of change, where you may always. So, low down, I was talking about the RDP project. Low down, low there, low horabao. Okata decide for using solar pumping machine pump. Suppose 2 weeks hem rain, people are trouble now because solar about no waka. So you see, the design, I think, they have to factor in what climate low area, yeah, weather low area, what's like. These things are important. So here we are looking at examples where the involvement of people, the communities, in planning these things, are very important because they know what is good for them. They know what is culturally important in that area. They know the weather. They know all these things. You have to factor these things into the planning and design to make it work. Fortunately, me a little bit got a fair idea of these projects because in the past 3 weeks, I was also part of the evaluation team where Okata evaluate team whether Okata RDP projects are successful or no more. So I was in the demo too, Miko passing home blow speaker. And then I was at a charging station for. Me asking people, what not charging station for? Okata say, him for charging mobile and laptop. But the time you check a mobile blow me, network lo place him nil now. So you see, while they have the need for improving water supply block, the choice of project wasn't just right. And Selen have spent them. And I realized that these guys were dumping the same projects passing to the rival community where Mifala Kamia. So having our part of the story to say what is good for us is important. And that is why the discussions where Mifal try for generate team are important, and especially findings from research. Tagyo Tumas.
Thank you, Gordon and Tony. I think role blumi lotufala mi driver lotufala. So I'm not really connected to the project, but I think for the sake of our discussion, let me start us provoking the discussion further. I think there's some fundamental outcomes that have been discussed. I think in what we looking now out of this research now is that there are certain things that are quite important at the macro level. Macro level meaning village level. So when you look at our context, in the Solomon's context, most of our rural villages resides on customary land. And when there is customary land, that means that there is no formal laws that are actually prescribed as how do we actually use them. When we talk about development and commerce in the entrepreneurial sense or the capitalist form, meaning that land should or must be sellable. Yeah? That's something that, by you looking inside the 10% of our nation, Honiara, that land becomes a commodity. I think that's the common denominator of any forms of Western notion of development. So when you take that perception down to the village level, and that is absence, that means these informal institutions that Gordon has been talking about are also absent in those places or particular areas. So confining our discussion or zooming it as we discuss into space and geography, it's quite difficult for us to conceptualize how do we actually penetrate into these areas and empower our rural people. I think that would be the major questions. So the findings of this research said that it's not, when we have some sort of societies, it's the informal institutions or the unwritten laws in these settings actually prescribes governance in these locations. And therefore, the mechanism of governments are there, but are not written or prescribed by law. We have the chiefs there who manage law and order, who gives sentences, who punish offenders. We do have the church who nurture the communities, to make sure that communities don't go astray. That communities abide with moral justice, ethics. And we do have commerce, which are prescribed through relationships. So when we talk about development at those particular space, we talk about that those relationships matters. So if you don't understand those relationships, fostering or empowering development in those spaces becomes a challenge for all of us. That gives me the pace to set our course for discussion. So how na ba mi actually empower them, okay, the people in rural areas? Let me take you back to the notion of state. Since discussion you mean actually low ground level or village level, there are three levels of analysis. Also, Gordon hem talem lo methodology blame. It's the society, it's the cohesiveness of the group, and it's the individuals in those villages that influences the outcomes of developmental industrial area. Yeah? So, the question now is, whose agenda, who will not drive actual development in those areas? Is it the state? Is it the NGOs? Or is it the member of parliament? Because these are the parties from the state level, up level, that actually influences the development discourses in those space and geography. The issue I find here, working a little bit time with the government, is that there is a disconnection between the state and the rural people. The only informal institutions inside the village, Hemblo ward member, Hemna WDC, and then RCDF, Hemblo MP. Those are the only two connections of the state that drives development in those particular spaces. Yeah. So, when our communities don't hold how many years receive him anything, and then one day, one guy just show up in the village with some good costumes, wearing good costumes, and said, "Hey, I have a project for you guys." I said, "Beggars have no choice. Imita kem na chance na." And that becomes customary. That becomes customary in those villages. So you might, perhaps in the long run, but if you're looking wolf inside the middle bush, yeah. Well, that's the trajectory we are looking at. So the ideal scenario here would be, on my contribution in this discussion would be to go astray from that local level and see the connection the state has with the common man low down low ground. Currently, there isn't any prescribed definition for development on the state. What do we actually mean by development when we talk about development? What do we actually mean by rural development when we discuss development? There is no alignment whatsoever at the ministerial level or the government department or ministry level to also define the term development. And how do we actually approach development at that level, low ground level? So most of the activities that are done there are on ad hoc basis. Churches have their own agendas, which to win souls. The MP has his own agenda. So those mechanisms are vulnerable for politics here. So we set up these institutions for development, but for a particular purpose, and that's designed for my ballot papers. So when you have design programs that are politically driven, it's quite difficult for us to really actually sit down as a community and put our agendas in front of them. those are some of the challenges I've experienced over a few years working as a public officer. Secondly, the disjoint coordinating roles of government vis-a-vis the rural areas. All these different ministries are picking the same basket and vying their own programs without any good coordination. For example, can anybody look at the provincial act or the provincial government there and say, do we actually have an ordinance on the definition of a village? What are the characters of a village? Should we have this legislated so that grants can be allocated appropriately? Unfortunately, we don't have those mechanisms in place. The Ministry of Provincial Government have their own things to do. Ministry of Agriculture have their own things to do. Infrastructure have their own things to do, and there is no coordination among this. These are not failures, but it might be just that we are yet to get there. But these are encumbering issues that continue to influence the way we perceive and foster development at the rural areas. So, when we have the absence of state mechanism at the rural areas, it becomes cumbersome to actually foster what we mean by it when we say development. Lastly, when we have a society that is, as I've said, customary land, these relationships matters. So the question now, whilst we open the debate or the discussion now, is how do we actually democratize the practices? How do we actually involve this community people into this formal setting? That is for us all to discuss. Thank you very much.
Having come away a long way now, and we are talking about the land matters in Solomon Islands. And the government of the day and the previous government have tried themselves to try and see how we can register our lands in Solomon Islands. With due respect to that, the differences we have in Solomon Islands, how can we do it, what is the best way forward? May I say my comment again in land matters about matrilinealism and the patrilinealism. Saddle woman, saddle man. And then, of course, we all have the clans below that, from the tribal system. Then we have the clans below those customs. And in fact, Solomon Islands is approximately about 85%, I would say, approximately. About 85% are rural people, and of course, it is a customary land owned by the tribes. And coming to developments, we have come a long way. It's approximately about 45 years after independence since 1975. I don't know how much we can go, and I don't know how much the government can do so that the land in Solomon Islands can be registered and it can be free for development. And I'm happy the three gentlemen here, they come to give us some more beautiful saying about our happy hours, how we can develop and how we can continue. So that the undeveloped, the untouched areas of Solomon Islands can be rectified so that those oldies like me, old man, finish too. So that we can share the responsibilities, we can share whatever income or generating project comes through. I think I might say too much now. And I think I've said the land tenure system, Solomon Islands, has to be fixed so that developments can go through the rural areas. And if you look at Honiara itself, Honiara grows to the east because there is land there. It can't grow to the west. Kakabona is already blocked. And of course, during the past 30 or 40 years ago, I predicted. I said to my kids, and I was teaching the classroom, Honiara is going to be developed eastward, not westward, because Kakabona is there. It is already blocked. In the east, the river's there. I was teaching the classroom, and I said to my pupils during those days, the good old days. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brother Cecil. I think the question or the comment that you made is a challenge for all of us. I think there are efforts currently ongoing, people looking at how best to deal with customary land, but there are other people who may be privileged to talk about that. But there are efforts, and of course, the challenge is on all of us in the room. We have to find solutions to these development challenges that we are faced with. It's not for somebody outside to come and tell us. I think I've attended land summits on Malaita and Goro Canal, some places who are, leaders discussing these things. But as Cecil said, we haven't come up to some concrete solutions. So it's up to us as Solomon Islanders. We want a better Solomon Islands for our kids, their kids, and the future generations. So I think it's a good challenge. All of us should be dealing with this. We should be suggesting ideas based on informed discussions on how to move these things forward. Thank you.
I think one of the things we highlighted, especially with regards to the research, these projects that we looked at, they were also located on tribal lands. But more importantly, for our case, we tried to look at how these institutions tried to get around the same problems that we are talking about now. And they were able to make things happen for them. And I was talking with Gordon when we were driving back, I think yesterday or the day before. I was saying to him, when we talk about rural development and development for our rural communities in Solomon Islands, we know exactly what we are talking about. It's not, sometimes we look at the very big things, but for the need of our people, we are talking about the basics here. We are talking about, giving them access to market. We are talking about providing the health service they need. So what we have seen in these cases is and which is helpful for our discussion. We looked at how these people navigated their way through challenges that we face everywhere in order to produce the goods they want, and especially to address some of the needs of the community. So I think these are the important things. We have the challenges there, but they should not always be used, because we see cases where people successfully, dealt with these challenges in order to make things happen. So that's what we try to articulate here. I think the land issue case is a very big one. That is why the government is hiring, consultants every year to try and deal with that. And we don't know. Probably we'll get the solution, and somehow we'll find a way.
Thank you. Another question here, but just a few, two comments. No more may like for me contribute. Yeah. One is the importance of the roles and responsibility where churches play to play. Yeah? I think the structure that our churches have in the Solomon Island is very important, because if you look good, you will not find any government officer whereby him sit down low community middle bush lo Malaita and Guadalcanal. No, you will see youth representative, women's representative inside Logatas churches. You mean now the stop lot places. So the structure that our churches have, and very important that Yumi must help Emogata for implementing whatever things that you may need for doing inside the communities, believe me. The second one, when we like contribute, Loyana, is that solving of issues. In fact, we don't really need outsiders to come and solve an issue, believe me. We have our own ways of solving issues, the traditional ways, all understanding, believe me. So time we try to involve him outsiders for solving issues, believe me, and bring him up issues more. Because these outsiders don't really understand what culture and traditions, believe me, for solving and sit down and straighten out the issues, believe me. So I think these are the 2 points that me like for contribute, Liam. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me this short time for let me comment now. Throughout this whole discussion, him giving me the idea that so that means that Solomon Island have one for a country with an incomplete government. Yeah? Awesome. Because when we're talking about government, we're talking about the sectors of government. Yeah? Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Infrastructure, all the line ministries, where should producing the services for the expectation of people, whole Solomon Island. Yeah? But some of the communities or home people ought no access to infrastructure, or ought no access to hospital or those developments, what expecting from the government. Maybe due to the land issue or land register, that's the way what development go inside what the rural areas. I think to address the issue of, if we come back to land, I think to address that issue of land dispute, why not if government can call on the tribal owners or on land, or register lands block, or under the name tribe. If those who are claimed to be the land owners, they register the whole land under their tribal ownership. For any certain development that come under the tribe. Because there are certain peoples within the communities where on tribes or on lands, or some know about looking at a dispute and any kind of things. Okay, when looking at if MPM come receive RCDF, we have an informal way of receiving funding for the people. Because RCDF, lo understanding last time, him should be go through the line ministries, and due to him no, try give him through line ministry, but him no walkable inside the rural areas due to land issue or something or something. So give him, divert him in a form of RCDF for the honorable members now. You will not try address him own constituency, for develop him in a way that you will look him possible. Why not if the government him recognize him of those things and empower him or the rural people, or local people for engage as part of the government too. Recognize him responsibility of chiefs as part of the government too for doing responsibility and set them our society in order for the developments here go through. Awesome. Why not for him make him a strategical development if he knows how for developing own constituency or own society, believe me? Because him no workable MP for whole RCDF then around the community and workable him for creating law inside the parliament. And at the end, if you look him go RCDF go hand block it now. Just a comment of him.
Okay, Bamina may respond. Probably, may answer him, yeah. But since Bami leave him to whole boss here, so but to whole Basco back na today. Migram class loss so Bami have to leave early. So let me just go before Gordon and Tony can also contribute later. I think those are the surrounding questions that we continue to ponder. And my thoughts today were saying that suppose we look lo RCDF as politicians, I'm lucrative issue. Okataman win, that's how you get your ballot paper, you get your seat back. Important, yeah. And to the justification, they also have counter arguments saying that, well, when provincial governments are ineffective, that's the only way money or government funds can get straight to the rural populace. People don't have lights before, now they have solar lights. They don't have water supplies, they do now have water supplies. Okay, again, I think the question of sustainability and the issue of access comes into prior to our discussion. My argument was saying that because there is no formal institution that we allow politically driven institutions to be placed in this space, that I'm politicizing full system now. Every chief, you talk about him, campaign manager, boss here. So in our system, although kata no talem, but if you don't vote, sorry now. But that's access. We have made access to become a weapon for political expenditure. So the thinking now is, how do the state actually design its new institution from actually have independent rural level now? WDC, but hem below MPA too, yeah. What committee blame, yeah, what campaign managers blame too. So others are not, or they are not included in that discussion. And on these institutions, I got run for 4 years, yeah. So we don't have the time to actually say, oh yeah, Amy go ahead lo business program or macro project, no. Because they don't show. Housing scheme and solar na hem, you put him up, him so out no. Next day, him say house vulnerable no lo. And that's, it's a lucrative industry for the design. The question now is, how do we actually drive the church? How do we actually drive government to go into those spaces and actually set up for him independent so that this discussion of what the theories come in? You mean need for sit down, identify interest groups. Those are what is said, books. Actual reality is the one we are talking about. So the issue of access and coordination, I think those are the two key terms. That will be, if we can ease those issues, we may be able to transform the design of the different projects, the community. Because RCDF, not RCDF, PCDF law province, but it's also follow Mogata executive law province. Yeah. So even your village don't need a school, they'll put a 2-story building there. Politics, yeah, municipal education, not talem, law province. So I think those are some of the issues that we don't really have answers for, but we are hoping that within this forum like this, your comments and your contribution can actually lead to something more tangible as formidable for IMI for IMI solvent. Thank you.
Okay, since me school teacher, me by comment come from two-fala perspective in relation to the study. Thank you so much for presentation. Balele Road, you talk about him, yeah, and barba access lo village lo mi middle lo busna lo north. So thank you too much. Okay, so Tami here come here in terms of looking at the prelim results lo here already. Yeah, me just like ask no more. How inclusive is the process lo village level in terms of learning about development, projects, and the processes that, are in place for making things like this happen. Me question come osem, because inside a village or a society, imigarem different levels of learners. yeah, pikinini, ot woman, ot man. And then, of course, leaders also for that matter. So, me garem noma that fala question from an education perspective noma, yeah, in terms of the inclusiveness of learning about these things. Yeah. Okay. Second question, blomi or comment noma. The background blomi noma in terms of linguistics. Yeah. From personal experience, me, I think 35 plus years old, then me just have a language word me for property rights. But development and all this funding and donor and aid, me lanem no school yet. Yeah? But time me older finish, then me just have. So in relation to education, normal also and learning, stakalo, you me move come staplo town na. How much of the terminologies, the phrases that connect us to our, land and the, understanding about, how things connect and also for you sabe making decisions where by him fitting you me for how things are come then by benefiting me and for you sabe. How much of, these things in terms of our language do we know? Language now also avenue for him have a continuum that follow knowledge, yeah. But if him finish normal law, one for pikinini by probably 10 years old, him no sabat staka something more, knowledge by him affected. Then time him like go back to village for go explain him more things, yeah. How na ba him connect with him okay ta where no sabe read and write, yeah. Malangus ya na, yeah. So from that perspective, him na me like make him come comment, yeah. I think by me finish Lord, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alice. I think point you raised him is very important. Even me fala time me fala design a research project here. Me fala consider language part here too, very important to us. So time me fala recruit him RAs here in order to make the people understand. We have to recruit Eric and one more gele where me fala go inside law. Communities lo bailelea, because we know that we have to get the terms right to them. Once we will talk with them, okat have to mean what we will talk about. So we also factored the language barrier into the design of the project. And if you know blow constituency, me no recruiting you have to. Then if you lo there but you stay lo Honiara had to. Me have to hear a new language before you come inside, because if me no sabe language, mahumo about language for me. So it's very important. That is why Gordon him say communication him very important. Communicating ideas, passing the message correctly, him very important. And in our cases, we factor that into the design of the methodology. So important question where statement where we raise him. Mifal also realize him. Tago Thomas.
I think just a quick comment in support to the comment made. I think language blame I'm critical because I'm directly connected to our the things the community blame me. For example, language or even names. You may be calling somebody Peter Jackson. You cannot connect him, Peter Jackson, to any tribe. Nah. If you call him me Gordon Nanau, I think you have to connect him or my name related law because of the name, and that's part of the language. Thank you.
Thank you, MC. I'm not a speaker. I mean, for this occasion. Sorry, yeah. Me alumni of USP. You just find them as an introduction, yeah? Law USP alumni page by looking somebody him introducing me. And time introducing me, him planted something where I took for granted over the years, yeah? But me come back law substance, but just to introduce, yeah? Him say, Oti was amongst the first cohort of Form 6s, Los Solomon Islands, 1977. He's also the first cohort of foundation year at USP, 1978. So you look up here, you all are born after we go to university and we go to school. That's a background. These are my colleagues, not lecturers, as lecturers, but also one talks, we first have Fiji, Suva. But I just like to share some views on what has been expressed so far. And back to that introduction, alumni, USB alumni page, hem talem, talk wami talem hem say, if you want to know where you are going, you better know where you come from. That's also captured in that, on that page. Well, to that extent, or close to that extent. So because of that, my use him now that one for you look lot issues where you may raise him today, we really have to know where you may come from. Otherwise, we'll be trying to struggle with equations that has no basis to move the way forward. And because of that, for example, the role of chiefs, whenever you capture him, it's already captured under Section 114 of the Constitution, when establishing provincial governments. Him also say, parliaments should also enact legislation to define the role of chiefs. So since 1978, Kasem this time, any law him come to parliament from other members where you fall choose him here, to invoke Section 114(2) of the Constitution to define the role of chiefs, make him give him now that responsibility why you may talk about them this time. At the moment, yeah, you may hear him here, have not formal establishment, yeah. So nobody recognizes them. There has to be a standard, yeah, where him apply right across the country, not only in some of our communities. So that's the role of chiefs. I think one colleague Blomen talk him go now, but him mentioned something about policies. If you have time, you revert to Hansard, the Parliament, report of Parliament, yeah, to 29th August 2008. Where you will find my statement where I moved a motion for take the responsibility of RCDF away from members of parliament and establish a mechanism for managing and administering the RCDF. Basically because constituencies are created under Section 54 of the Constitution, and say the country shall be divided into constituencies for purposes of electing members to parliament. No anything talk about them handling out projects. So how about project or administration where purpose law, election law, are totally different. It's to do law, legislation of parliament. One parliament Italian or no pass 114 law constitution section 2. And now should concentrate on him, not law RCDF. That motion him pass 2008. I was still a member of parliament. Last term, I refused to handle RCDF. So I lost the elections in 2010. So I stuck by the principle, I'm not going to be bothered to be a project officer, because that's not what I'm elected for as a member of parliament. So what? You know, looking now, associated member with a project, you will vote the money out. Of course I'm out. And that was how I left. All right? But if you want to know the whole history of RCDF, why you looking now inside this whole motion? I was born with the RCDF as permanent secretary of the Ministry of Provincial Government in 1991. RCDF was created by the People's Alliance Party after the elections in 1989. So I was the accounting officer for RCDF, Law Administration Fund. So when I moved the motion, we welcome RCDF, and you will see, if you go through that record, by looking at how him climb, go, you look him go now. Me fall by concentrate now, RCDF, me fall no concentrate, no any commitment to law making, yeah, law parliament. So problem with me, law development, yeah, have to do with the system, with the procedures and process. Okay, I'm not sharing directly what the views say, but I just like to express my views based on my background when we cast them this time. By December 31, if I'll finish more, yeah, back to square one. So what do we do? Generation. What the problem now is, the future is in the hands of the present generation. You fall. If I'll outgoing finish, me tell them finish now, yeah? 78 come, 77. Come. PS, minister. Go kasem speaker too. Yeah? What not left? Sky, yeah, ba? Thank you for your attention. But be broadly, me point out this one, me look at them a solution. Yeah? Actually, I'm written finish here if I look at them. And for academia, yeah, you will be the basis for the future. We have to refer to and make reference to what I'm not down in the books. And then we can define the policy. Yeah. So what's the basis of policy? Have not the research is here. So by me make a motion, communities blame me. Actually, in the end, they are victims of a process that is not complete, or them have all bad. Thank you too much.
Thank you so much.
No, we hear him what first share him very interesting, but we like share him no more to experience blooming lot projects. Yeah? What you will tell him about straight, and I think communication now same catch him as main thing where me face him lo what projects lo village. Medium one project lo renal blue government, and we go down. It is the one talk no more. What I come for deal, we'll come back. We ring go back what less. What's a project blog government so up rate. Then we say, it is a technique blog wale no that one. So we have to go back. If we go deal with the chief more. So the chief little bit. Oh, you go my no steps. So things seem a little bit straight. So we will start work out. What comes say. You know, work lo Sunday. So I say, ay, Sunday lo here na, lo renol. So first start lo here na. But then later me realize him that man onam story we for sakad lo him blow SSCC. So okay, Sunday even know work lo Sunday. Yeah. So time we talk about all the things what time go through, then talk lo right people, communication. I think him me get me for me realize him. Even lo research from me. We go deal with the wrong man, go, so we just give up too. So you need to find the right person for what now take a mule place, talk lo man osem. So him very interesting time you look him. And like, as I've said, if I got say him project, or I'd say, oh, must select high. If you say private, you left private, then later I'd find out, okay, you swing back low project. So him making me happy for realize him too that him not only low renal but him same everywhere. Eh? So him no want me, so me just like for share him no more lo experience by me lo project lo successful project lo islands. I think him no me like share him then by Mr. Lo side pool na for flying blue boss. Okay, thanks.
At this point, Milak say very big thank you lo Dr. Nanau, Hiriasia, and invisible Dr. Derek, who I'm out finished from you me. Him the driver blow to fall, but him end up lo front today too. Milak, you may give him big hand lo to fall, please. Thank you so much, and Milak you fall give him big hand for you fall Seleva too, because without you fall, full program by no happen too. And okay, yeah.
Just on behalf of our partners Blomifala too, DFAT, DLP and other universities Mitalem today, I'd also like on their behalf to thank you for participating and also you share my ideas with the Mifala. So on their behalf, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone.